right. Would you like me to share the doc? Share the screen, and then
sure. And we can pull up the agenda that's been put on GitHub, and go from there.
Sure. Let's do this. Right. Agenda, and I'm gonna go find the agenda. So, would you like to kick us off first, Christian?
It is linked in this Slack message I put out last week. So, welcome to the first public TSC meeting under the open governance of OpenTofu. We're going to run through the agenda, try and come to any conclusions we need to, vote on them, and go from there. Fairly straightforward, but just with a little bit more community participation than before, which I'm looking forward to. So James has almost got the
Yep, here's our current agenda. So to kick things off, we did put forward the governance documentation recently, and part of the governance documentation that we had mentions that our members are provided as part of the one of the files in our GitHub repo, maintainers.md. Yeah, so I'll quickly switch to this. Our maintainers.md currently lists this. However, we did not assign a chair of the TSC, but the chair of the TSC is mentioned within the governance.
So this is actually a separate file. I think it's contributing.md. They're supposed to, like, the TSC members are mentioned. This is the list of maintainers.
Yeah, here we go. The current TSC members are here. We did not assign a chair. Up until now, Christian Mesh has kind of been our technical lead, but now we're solidifying things. We believe we should start with an actual vote on who should be chair. So also it's a nice way for us to practice voting, I suppose. How do we want to vote? Do we just hold hands, thumbs up, thumbs down? Do we need a voting system?
I think it's usually, I think the governance doc actually says something along the lines of, like, it's consensus, which is like just a verbal, like nobody disagrees.
Okay.
And if it's not consensus, then we do a formal thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yep.
I'm very happy to go to that. Does anyone disagree with Christian being the TSC chair?
I disagree. Sorry, I know this is a little bit of a surprise, James, because we had spoken about this. If I'm the only one who wants to do it, I can fill the role, but I think as I'm stepping out of tech lead, I think that at least for now, it's important that I step back a little bit from that.
Okay. Would you be interested in being interim chair for whilst we're doing the CNCF onboarding?
I'd be up for that. Yeah.
With the aim that we find a new chair ASAP?
I'd be okay with that.
Do we want to put a time limit on that?
Hopefully the CNCF stuff should be sorted within the next month. So then or sooner. I finally got to write some code last week, and I'm very happy about that. So I'm trying to manage my time a little bit more carefully.
That's fair. I just want to time box it because I know these things tend to run on.
Yep. So
we
what we should do, sorry.
No, go ahead first, Christian, please.
Saying one thing we can do is pre-create some of the future agenda items and put it on the list that way for next, like, as we're writing down the notes for this meeting, we can put in agenda items for next meeting. So.
Would you be okay being interim chair then, with the intention that the TSC replaces you as soon as possible?
Yeah, I can move that.
Is everybody else happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. Anything else that anyone would like to discuss on the TSC chair position? No. All right, Christian, do you want to take us away with 1.11.0 possible big ticket features?
Sure.
Quick one, James.
Sure.
Sorry, quick one. So the charter, so governance document doesn't mention the chair, and only chair mentioned is in charter, from what I can see. And it says that like TSC may elect TSC chair, who will preside over meetings, but no real responsibilities actually of the TSC chair are described anywhere. So the question is, do we actually need chair right now? Because may means like we may not. So like what problem right now we're trying to solve is like electing chair?
It's a good question.
Okay. What is it? A TSC chair who will preside over the meetings of the TSC and serve until their resignation. Is it just that they run this meeting?
It seems like it.
I think so.
If it's just that, I'll do it.
All right, I nominate James.
Really, the question: do we need the chair
We
at
need
this
it.
moment? I
Yeah,
understand
no,
like
I
understand that like if we like will be big with a huge TSC, maybe it makes sense to like have one, but right now it's not required, and I don't think electing chair will solve like any issues or like any problems or close any gaps at this moment.
Sounds reasonable to me. So, Igor, you're proposing defer until we decide we need a little bit more stringent organization of this meeting.
Until we need one. Just to keep things simple.
Yeah. Yagni, Kiss, etc. Yeah. Does anyone?
So anyone against not electing chair?
There is part of me that would rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. But I don't think we're in that situation right now. So I think we're okay deferring it for a while.
Sounds good.
All right. On to 1.11. So the good news is the ephemeral work, which we had talked about previously, is moving along nicely. Andre has taken point on that, one of the maintainers. And he'll likely be pulling in additional resources as he starts doing some of the more heavy graph related items. But so far he's been cruising on that faster than expected. So I'm hoping that that will mean that we could get 1.11 out faster than some of our previous releases. Again, we'll see what form that actually takes, but I think we're in a pretty good spot for that. Not all of our developers can or should be working on that feature. We'd like to spread out a little bit. I think there's been some talk about this kind of ties into stacks and some of the other larger features that have been talked about. I think there was an issue opened up earlier today about that, but when doing triage with the maintainer group and just going through the issues on a weekly basis and trying to move them along as quickly as possible, we have quite a few that are in limbo because of there's a lot of thoughts on the future of workspaces and backends, and a lot of those concepts are tied together. Bart Atkins proposed a different understanding of what a workspace is, or potentially some new concept to replace that idea. It ties static evaluation backends and TF bars files together in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. The idea needs refining. It needs product vision with folks that are more familiar with some of the more enterprise level customers that are trying to use this. So what I'd like to propose is that we assign 1 or 2 members from the TSC to work with Barton and potentially one other developer refine this over the coming weeks before we actually get started on 1.11. But if we could have a really good understanding of this is Tofu's new idea of workspaces, this solves like 20 or 30 issues in our repository and makes working with larger, more complex organizations a bit easier. If anyone's ever had to line up your TFRs file, your backend, and your file, one other thing I'm forgetting because it's did not get as much as I wanted to listen. Anyways, trying to line up an environment to apply compared to having multiple different directories or having tools to symlink stuff together. I think this could be a really big win for us. James, what else am I forgetting for that we've talked about for the in the maintainer circle for 1.11?
For 1.11, we've got a small bug. There's a few bug fixes, but I don't think they require TSC input on anything about this. We have upcoming items that Terraform are working on around resource identities, deferred actions, and the such. And we should probably be discussing those. I don't know if we have any issues open. In fact, one issue opened up today about resource identities. I can quickly share this issue and we can discuss. Is anybody unfamiliar with the idea of resource identities? I know it's quite new. I think it just came out in the latest version of Terraform. In fact, I will just not put anyone on the spot and I will discuss about resource identities. So resource identities are a way of a provider assigning a static ID to a resource. So for AWS, I assume 99% of the time this is going to be an ARN. And this gets stored in the state file alongside everything else. HashiCorp have mentioned in one of their issues, I haven't read into it any further, that they are integrating this with their search functionality in HCP Terraform that is upcoming. I believe it is a way to manage unmanaged resources or to do mass imports of state. But HashiCorp has documentation. I will share this for provider authors. But what you can do is in Terraform is you can do an import using a specific identity instead of importing with an ID in a specific format that is documented individually for each of the different types of resources. I think it's low priority right now because it looks like HashiCorp is writing tooling around this in general, but it's something that we could keep an eye on and maybe do for 1.11.
I think our approach of either preemptively creating issues or when the community opens up issues, seeing how much people are rallying around them, it has served us well. Ephemeral between one release to the next went from 5 thumbs up to, I think it's easily over 100 now. So that kind of puts it on the fast track for the maintainers. I think that's served us well in the past, and I don't see reason to change that now. The trickier part is when we get into issues like the future of workspaces and backends. There's 20 or 30 different issues, a couple PRs and prototypes that are kind of coming together, but organizing that larger piece of work is something that we need to start figuring out how to do as an organization.
Arul?
Yeah, so a couple of questions. First of all, regarding resource identities, it seems like something we should wait with. I'm not entirely even sure why they had to do that. IDs were already unique. Maybe it's like a way of simplifying that or something, but not sure what's the purpose here. As for future of workspaces, I took a quick look at the issue. Not entirely sure. I mean, we should probably discuss what the pain is if we want to address that. I'm not entirely sure that some of the pains described there are something that a lot of users care about a lot. It is more noticeable in OpenTofu when you do early evaluation, but I do wonder if that's like something very high priority. That's my
Maybe one of the tasks that we should do first here is one of the things we've been struggling with as in the maintainers is associating all of these different issues that overlap. And this one issue is great at identifying like, hey, I want to get rid of workspaces. But we had a conversation today in the triage meeting with the maintainers where we were saying, oh, this overlaps with it because they wanted to do reading, adding functions to TFR files anyway, or a situation of like people want to misuse var files that are being read in with environment variables. And all of these pain points, if you look at like an XY problem, that people are coming to us with a solution going, hey, I want to go and read the path, or I want to go and do some functions in my TFR files. If you take a step back, what they're actually designing is a multiple environment situation for OpenTofu. They are doing prod and pre-prod, or US and EU, and the same stuff that we've been seeing over and over again. But we should collate, I think, these issues and figure out.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think Martin's got a pulse on a number of these issues. And this is kind of what I suggested, that we should pair him as a maintainer with some folks on the TSC who are familiar with some of these pain points and start looking at what can we do today, what approach do the tacos do, and where could there be some potential improvement between the two. Because one thing that's clear is the tacos spend a lot of their day saying, okay, this tool has issues. These are some of the ways we can fix it. And trying to find more built-in ways to do that, I think could be useful. I see James put on an input on there, which I kind of related, but
yeah, I'll just leave that off the bottom of the page now. It's a reminder so I don't forget.
I without being overly familiar with the specifics of that one, just a quick alarm bell on the idea of scrapping workspaces altogether. And that'll probably constitute a breaking change that I think we've been keen to stay away from the date, but just
yeah,
I'm happy to jump in and be part of this kind of smaller group if need be, but it's just a calling out there that
so one thing,
double check our current position on making breaking changes.
So I think Martin opened that issue up with a provocative title in order to get people to give very direct feedback. I think as the conversation evolved in that issue, it followed more along the lines of, okay, if we were to design this feature today, what would it look like? And there's a lot of ways that we could either build in a Tofu migrate command for that version, which would still be breaking change in the first time we'd be doing something like that. Or what we do is we figure out a way to parse existing configuration and pull that into a view of the new system, which I think is kind of what we do. So the old commands would still work, the configuration would still be valid, but it would be recommended to opt into the functionality for the foreseeable future. But sometimes it's hard getting feedback from the community unless you say something provocative. Because people see that and like, whoa, I need to leave my feedback here. So I would highly recommend taking a read through that issue and looking at some of the linked issues, because I think this could solve a lot of pain points for a lot of people and remove a lot of hackiness from people's tofu infrastructure. And could be some cool taco integrations as well.
I tried to find a nice way to summarize the notes there, but I think that does leave a question maybe for a future agenda, which is, what is our stance on breaking changes, and what is going to be the breaking point at which we say this is a breaking change, we're separating, and we should probably investigate how OpenSearch, Valkey, and everything else is.
I think It's less about breaking changes, but it's compatibility changes with Terraform. There are two separate issues.
It's valid. Does anyone else want to discuss workspaces before I move on to the next item for 111?
Just wanted to make sure that when that breakout happens, I know Yusuf is very interested in this conversation, and obviously there's a lot of overlap in subject matter with TerraGrunt. So would love to just make sure that we're collaborating there and incorporating those ideas best we can. So I think very concretely, if and when there's a breakout group to discuss this, I want to make sure that Yusuf is invited.
Also put my name into that.
Okay.
Well,
So
I was
this-
going to recommend that we... No, go ahead, Christian, you first.
No, you go.
I was going to recommend we brought in Yusuf for the next problem as well, which is unknown inputs. Because I think this does overlap with some TerraGrunt functionality. So does anyone mind if I might not move on to the unknown inputs? Trying to keep the thing moving.
I just wanted to, so just something actionable out of that. So we've got Yusuf on the list. Who else do we want to put on the list for putting together a subcommittee or a group that is in charge of refining this large feature that we could get status updates on every week at the TSC meeting? Just to try something, because this is one thing I'd really like to get out of the TSC is the ability of putting my maintainer hat on, is to put together groups of people with expertise and knowledge that can help refine these large issues that are hard to do as like a bug by bug fix for. And I'd like to use this one as a trial run for that if folks are up for that. So we've got Yusuf. I think Roger, you had said you were looking into that a little bit. You might have time and be interested to do that. Anyone else feel strongly about getting in and helping refine and put together a proposal for how to tackle this large piece of work?
I would like to be involved. Roger, yourself as well. Okay. And then Martin Atkins as well.
Yeah, let's
If it won't create any scope, like any people like scope creep, you can add me as well. I'm more than interested.
Okay. You don't need an equals full name. Cool. We can collect a group to do this and we can start a discussion.
that's good.
Cool. Am I okay to move on to unknown inputs? Keep the meeting going. Okay, unknown inputs. This is the issue. I will share it here because I realize I'm also not sharing this. Issue made here a long time back. So, share this tab. There's a situation where you have multiple different projects, multiple different state files, and you maybe want to be passing values between each of them. There are also now situations with ephemeral values coming in where we have some purposely unknown values. And Terraform is doing some work around deferred actions, in which there are some possibly unknown values for certain reasons. Maybe they're not known until after the apply has happened, but you want to be doing some planning before that. And so one of the proposals that we have here to start off work in this area is allowing Tofu Plan to take a list of input variables that are unknown. And this allows you to do some, what is the word? Best effort, maybe, planning with these unknown variables. One of the reasons I was going to pitch that we included Yusuf or Zach from TerraGrunt is because TerraGrunt, one of the big pieces of TerraGrunt functionality that people used is mocked outputs of module interdependencies, especially when people are using TerraGrunt Graph, Run All, and all the other dependent projects. And so I definitely believe that from a product design point of view, we should be including them to say, hey, if you were to design this feature today, how would you like it? What pitfalls have you been hitting? How can we avoid security problems, etc., etc. And this is one of the big ticket items that I think Christian would like as well, but I personally would really like for 1.11, and it sets us aside.
I think the big issue, and I think if we scope this right, it could be relatively straightforward to implement. Kuba created a prototype a while back. But the main issue is you can't, for reach and count values can't be unknown. That's kind of where deferred actions come in a little bit. But I think for an initial implementation of this, there's a huge number of scenarios where something might be unknown, but it's no different than a local or a data source or some other thing being unknown at a given time. So we could implement this with the idea that it's just forbidden in for each count and potentially some areas within providers, depending on what's going on. But we can enable this feature for the vast majority of cases and start to work on alternative ways of implementing some of those edge cases over time, but get the meat of it out of the way first, and see how many people actually care about those edge cases.
I definitely think when you start discussing edge cases, that one of the steps that we need before starting this work is a full RFC to discuss how it fits into the big picture of the language in the long run, right? This can have potential impacts if we go and introduce this on other features in the future, and we should definitely go and ensure that we have an RFC in place and discuss this heavily amongst the TSC and others.
My main concern here was clashing with the idea of deferred actions, because it seems like when using deferred actions, I'm not sure, I didn't go into the details of that too much, but I don't know if there's anything public as well, but wouldn't this be pretty much mitigated if we decide to do that? And then do we want like multiple ways of achieving the same thing?
So I think part of this, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, this is my rough understanding. I believe TerraGrunt subs in temporary values when things are unknown between different projects. And that process is not ideal. And I'd be surprised if TerraGrunt was the only tool doing that at this point. But there's a couple different scenarios this is trying to solve. One is the deferred actions due to unknown values in a provider. So you can look at like the Kubernetes provider, which can say, hey, the cluster's not ready yet, but I think I'll create something that looks like this, which is nice. But unknown inputs there's a whole nother suite of issues around there that would be nice to be able to handle. So I think they're complementary, if my understanding is correct.
Okay, yeah. So for TerraGrunt, that does make sense. It's not something that deferred actions is gonna.
I think it's the language TerraGrunt uses is like this idea of, I think, Christian, you call them projects, like a single tofu execution, right? Versus chaining together and organizing and managing multiple tofu executions. This is very helpful for when you've zoomed out a higher level, and you are orchestrating multiple different tofu executions at once. It allows the flexibility there, so you don't have to define these things manually every time. I do think it's an interesting question. How do we, as a technical community, think about these sort of two different layers in the stack, right? Like we add abstractions to make an individual tofu execution more powerful. And then, of course, there's TerraGrunt, which adds lots of additional abstractions to make multiple executions more powerful. And like, what is that? Is there a firewall there, or not necessarily a firewall, but a contract, right? Intellectually, should that contract exist? Or is there a future 10 years from now where TerraGrunt doesn't have to exist at all, and all of that everything can just be done with a single tofu execution? Or do we think there is a world where actually there should be an orchestration layer on top of tofu, allowing multiple different executions to do different things, and that you get capabilities or efficiencies with that? And I think that I'm not necessarily proposing that today, but I think as we move down this path, having a guiding principle and a clear vision that we're all aligned with, or that at least the TSC is aligned with, might be helpful when deciding and prioritizing these features.
It's something that recently came up in a discussion between myself and Martin Atkins, where Martin Atkins pitched this idea. In general, we were talking about how we can move towards this, what do they call it, terrorless, kind of how can we deal with people who are running these large infrastructures. And recently, actually, Matt Gowie raised an issue on OpenTofu to discuss the idea of groups and being able to work in larger scopes. And what's interesting to me and what I would love to discuss in the future on a different agenda is if we were to have an orchestration layer built into OpenTofu, is that built into OpenTofu, or do we have an OpenTofu orchestration layer that sits somewhere between the scale of single OpenTofu project and Atlantis and Terra Grunt and all the tacos? Or do we help those tools and integrate nicely? And what would that look like in the big picture? My personal opinion is that we should have a way to separate the two. I don't think that Tofu binary should become one big orchestration layer and handle things between multiple projects. But I've seen arguments on the other side, and we should definitely collate and discuss those.
It'll come as no surprise that I'm of the opinion that technically the cleanest, correctest answer is for the separation of responsibilities. That should be two different things. And I think that what we already see is there's different ideas on what good orchestration looks like. Like there are tools, there are other orchestrators other than Terra Grunt. And I think that's a good thing, right? Like to see a marketplace of ideas and have innovation come from multiple different angles that, different, Terra Grunt has pulled things from other tools and other tools have pulled things from Terra Grunt, and the community as a whole is better because of it. If it was just an OpenTofu and OpenTofu was the only thing doing orchestration, I think we would lose some of that. And then there's also just from a technical perspective, it is clean to have the separation.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably still an argument somewhere in there around can Tofu, are there further primitives that Tofu can expose to make the job of those tools easier? Rehashing old ground in some ways. It's been discussed at some time over the last year and a half, 2 years.
I think it's very valid, and I hope I don't sound like I'm insulting Terra Grunt when I say this, but all of us tacos, I'm probably sure, feel the same way. We built what we had on top of the CLI tool that was written by HashiCorp for a while. And we were dealt the hand we were dealt with, and we made workarounds to go and do this. But now we don't have to make workarounds. We can go and talk to all of the individual tacos, the community, Atlantis, Terra Grunt, try and figure out how we can make OpenTofu work better in an orchestrated way. Because we're seeing more and more people want this orchestration. Yeah. Okay. So, I believe, sorry, just to wrap up the unknown inputs, I believe that's everything to discuss about it. There is this overlap with deferred actions, which I think we should definitely address in the RFC that Ariel raised. Does anyone have any other big ticket items that could be possible to go into 111? Because we are looking at 111 very soon. 110 is almost a release candidate, so. So one of the other things to mention, I don't know if it was in the agenda, it's not, but we can maybe discuss this in the next TSC meeting, but the maintainers will be doing a hackathon probably next week, and maybe some creative ideas will come out of that alongside whatever the community wants, and we can put those forward. Okay. Would anyone like to discuss anything else before we move on to the CNCF onboarding? Christian.
This isn't. I tend to think of performance as a feature. Some people disagree, but I've been poking around a lot in OpenTofu's execution paths and some of the more crazy scenarios. And what I would like to do is get feedback from the tacos once 1.10 is out, what sort of performance impact that has on your execution times. There is some pretty glaring low-hanging fruit that I've started picking at, and some optimizations that I think will also reduce memory in a pretty significant way if done right. So it's more of a nebulous concept, but it's something that I enjoy poking at, and I think that helps all the tacos and TerraGrunt in the process, as well as the community as a whole. I mean, I have 64 gigs of memory. I don't want Tofu to run and try to use all 64 gigs of memory.
I think as an initiative, a few of us from different companies can go away and try and grab some stats to see if runtime has been reduced. If not, I assume we're all dog fooding OpenTofu as well, and we can go and see if it's been reduced ourselves anyway.
I did have a follow-up question I'm realizing now. So Go has a profiler tool. Would it be, I might just put up a PR for this and see what people think, but adding a flag that allows OpenTofu to print out a Go profile that someone can just send to a dev and say, hey, this took 20 minutes, and I think it should only take 2. Here's my profile, which might contain sensitive information, and gives us some pretty direct debug information on what the hotspots in the code are.
If you can give me instructions, I can give you plenty of profilers on, if it doesn't contain like any sensitive data, like parts of plants or outputs, etc. Then I can give you plenty of variety of sizes and execution times profiles.
Excellent.
Just send instructions like what's need to be done.
Just to counter that, I know I'm biased.
Hotel.
OpenTelemetry has just been added into 110, and theoretically, once it's complete, should cover 99% of these use cases.
There
Could be
is
hard to compare with 1.9, but yeah, for future state, that would be great.
Yeah. I think part of it is so to me, OTel gives the shape of what's being tested and what might be slow, but the profiler digs deep into, oh yeah, this thing's like the locking contention. That was easier to figure out with the profile dump, but OTel should be the tool that is reached for most of the time. I agree with that.
Yeah, and I agree. When I wrote the OpenTelemetry RFC originally, the first one, it was to help people, like, so we didn't have to create profiles. And we ended up scoping it a lot smaller. So the OpenTelemetry is great to help people self-serve. And the idea there is to help people reduce the amount of providers that they're downloading, the amount of time that network requests are taking, things that they can be in control of. And there are situations where they're not in control of how we serialize a large JSON state to disk, or we're sat waiting on IO wait while writing out to an NFS store somewhere. I don't know. So yeah, maybe we can. How would you feel, Christian, about writing an RFC around that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Oh, cool. So
Sorry for that light item. We've got CNCF on board.
I realize that I'm trying to move us on, but we should probably try and make some decisions on the back of these items. So ephemeral values, the work is already ongoing, just to discuss all of these and wrap it up. Future of workspaces, we're going to get a group of people together to discuss this, which is great, and we can write some documentation about that. Resource identities, do we feel like this is a high priority, a low priority? RL mentioned it felt pretty low priority and we should sit and wait for it to...
Can I make a suggestion for this one? Can we nominate somebody to sort of be the person to develop a well-informed opinion? Speaking of my understanding, based on the little bit I've read and the conversation today, I don't feel like we as a TSC have a very clear understanding of what was Hashi's motivation for this. What is the set of problems it aims to solve? Does OpenTofu have those same problems? Do we agree on the solution that they've implemented? I think just making somebody accountable for becoming the expert would be good.
Yep, sure. I think I'm already the one who's kind of doing that, absorbing as much of the information as possible that is out there publicly on the HashiCorp issues that's not in pull requests. So far, what I can tell you is that they've mentioned it shouldn't be used by end users. It's mainly to be used by HTTP Terraform.
I think we should break that, but I want to understand that better.
I personally can see some great uses for it. I can imagine that, and I'm purely speculating here, but one of the attackers could read the state file to fetch all of the resource identities, and you can very quickly then determine from all of your state files which of your AWS ARNs are being managed or are not being managed by Terraform, and you don't have to know the structure of each of the different resource types in the state file to go and fetch the identity. So it allows you to search across everything. And I assume that's what their search in HTTP Terraform is that they mentioned. But speculation. I'm not a HTTP Terraform user.
So, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you were asking for something tangible that we could like read asynchronously and use to make a decision in the next meeting, or am I misreading that?
Yeah, that's the idea. I'd be interested in sort of maybe a short write-up of what we think the motivations are and the problems, and then we can use that to get the TSC up to speed over time. Is there some urgency here?
No.
No.
But if we can take something that was just released and is supported in a bunch of the big providers and build something cool with it and put that in the next release, that would also be cool.
Yeah. I figure adding the parity with Terraform right now, which is the imports, should be fairly quick for our engineers to do. It's a quick win. But I can write up an issue and we can discuss this. There's no priority. Unknown inputs. We should write a full RFC. I can talk to Kuba Martin, who wrote the original issue, to see if he would flesh it out to an RFC.
Reaching out to, responding to Dushab, who asked a question in the chat. So primarily we use this.
For the recording, can you read out the question?
Oh, yes, sorry. So is it involved in the recording? Might be. Anyways, out of curiosity, is there is still a so-called taint team around to ask, is the buffer between core maintainers and members who can browse HashiCorp code? So we've never used the taint team in that way. It was mostly this PR was submitted. We need someone to take a look and make sure that it's not infringing. We now have a separate solution that we have internally. This is no longer the core team members or the maintainers, and have a separate solution. But in principle, whenever we're looking at so if we need a buffer so that the maintainers and developers don't look at Terraform code, we just don't look at Terraform code. We look at issues, we look at release notes, we look at blog posts, but we just firewall ourselves off from that code as much as we can.
Yeah, we just don't read it.
Yeah. There's lots of legal questions around what could be done, but we, talking with the Linux Foundation, take it as a reasonably conservative approach here.
All right. To move on to CNCF onboarding, because we only have 15 minutes left and two big items to discuss. So, CNCF onboarding current status gives a status update. I shouldn't make notes and talk at the same time. Share this tab instead. So our onboarding project has been ongoing through the last couple of weeks. Not much happened last week. So we are currently in the situation. This is our current to-do list from myself. We are fully done on their documentation. We have not migrated our Slack, which I wanted to talk about in a second. And then they would like us to adopt a tool. This can come after our onboarding. So we've also been asked to be added to the maintainers list, and this has happened by the looks of it. So the one thing that is blocking our CNCF migration is the CNCF onboarding is the Slack migration. and I believe we discussed this a little bit last week internally, but I wanted to discuss this. In fact, I'm going to quickly give Christian write access to the docs. So no, it's all right. I wanted to discuss this week about a action plan. So what we can do as owners of the OpenTofu community Slack is we can do an export of our user email list and Slack channels if we want, and we can import those into the CNCF workspace within Slack. CNCF have said that they've migrated successfully around 9,000 users, I believe it was, for Argo CD, and 12,000 users for another group. So I think they're quite used to and equipped for migrating people over to their Slack. We discussed it internally, and I believe we all kind of agreed that it would be best to move over to the CNCF Slack. Primary reason was it's a paid Slack, so we get full history. We get a deep integration within the CNCF ecosystem, and the CNCF puts effort into maintaining the code of conduct within there, and so that takes the strain off of our maintainers right now who are doing that. So we probably need to put an action plan in place for Slack migration, and there will be a period of time after talking to the Linux Foundation. There'll be a period of time where both places exist. Because you don't shut down one workspace and move everybody. It's more of a export data and you've got a duplicate, and we ask people to move across. So what I was going to propose is that this week the maintainers start closing down and aggregating all of our channels in our community Slack, because we have a lot of the channels already. I already believe a lot of these channels as well that we don't need that many channels. We have a lot of active users, but we get 1 or 2 messages a day. It's not a big deal to deal with things in one channel. So if we can aggregate all of our channels into one place, decide what we are going to be migrating across, then as maintainers can create an export, pass it over to the Linux Foundation to import, and we notify all of the users on our Slack that we will be migrating to the CNCF Slack. Please move all conversations over there. And I'll write down this action plan and discuss it before we execute and get a sign off. There were 2 raised hands quickly on this one. Roger first.
I'm just curious about the ordering. The migration, does it need to happen before people start using the CNCF one, or should we start directing people there now so that the traffic on the old one starts tailing off?
We could start migrating. We could start directing people and then migrate people. We could do both at the same time. Like just put out an announcement saying we're moving, we import, export, import even, and then tell people to migrate across.
Cool.
Eagle?
Yeah, I would just a little bit adjust this plan. So I would start with announcement first. Because we'll start consolidating channels, we'll start moving things around, and I know that some people used to like very tied to the current way of things are, so with confusion. So I would just outline, make a post for general. Hey guys, we are like as part of CNCF onboarding, we moving to the CNCF. The process will look like: first we consolidate the channels. Second thing, we export all the emails. And within the next, I don't know, like some timeline, 7 days, expect. So I don't believe that they will just magically appear in CNCF Slack workspace. Most likely they will receive an invite to join, which means that we also need to like, hey, we need to say to them like, hey, within the next like 7 days, let's say, or whatever timeline is, you will receive like everyone who is part of this OpenTofu community will receive an invite to join CNCF, and by I don't know, like by June 10th, for example, a random date here, this Slack will cease its operations and all communications will be in this channel. And I would actually go and create the channels in CNCF Slack in advance. So we can start like even in this announcement, we can start directing people there. So like people can do this on their own timeline as well.
That sounds good to me. Just a heads up, the OpenTofu channel has existed on the CNCF Slack for a long time already.
Yeah, it's like one or multiple channels. Like, do we need to decide like what we want to have there? But yeah, so we can include this in announcements. So like, this is what we have today. This is what we are doing, and this will be the end and view when it's all done.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking of just having these two channels as we go forward.
Would maintainers be open or locked down?
Open.
Sounds good.
But that's a place for us to have more technical, in-depth discussions and not have to get in the way of community members asking questions about as end users. Well, does anyone have any other reservations or questions? If not, I will look at making an announcement on the OpenTofu community Slack tomorrow, start setting some deadlines, and we can start migrating people. And this will be our final stage within our CNCF onboarding. We should then be within the CNCF the next couple of weeks. Zach?
Just to say it out loud, on one hand, it's sort of, I don't know, it feels like we're losing something to not have our like founders chats and our private TSC Slack channels anymore that were so instrumental in the foundation and the formation of OpenTofu. But on the other hand, the fact that those things are going away and we're being part of the CNCF kind of means it was successful. So it's bittersweet to say goodbye to some of these private little communities we've created, but I'm excited for the future and grateful for all the hard work everyone's done to get here.
So I want to clarify on this one because we do have two OpenTofu Slacks internally for people. So we have the OpenTofu community Slack. This is what we are migrating everyone over to the CNCF Slack about. Zach, our internal Slack, we will be discussing a migration plan to get off this in the long run anyway. I want to reduce it down quite a lot. Maybe we can reduce it down to a couple private channels on the CNCF Slack. But I do agree with you. There has been a very useful internal community between all of the different, what's the word I'm looking for? Begins with an S. People who give money to OpenTofu. Sponsors. All the individual marketing teams, coordination around events, things like this have been very helpful within our internal Slack. And maybe we can just have another third channel, OpenTofu Friends and Family, where we can include all the people from sponsors. But yes, but if you go and look at our internal Slack, my God, it's got even more channels that are all defunct and need archiving and getting rid of. It got out.
Actually, it's a good point. Like things like legal, marketing, and other stuff, it's not going anywhere. And especially around legal, some of the things are can be very sensitive, and there should be some areas where like only certain people can discuss them.
My proposal was going to be that our internal Slack gets reduced down to just legal marketing general.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And all the development, all of the active stuff goes to the CNCF Slack.
That makes sense. Yeah.
As the maintainers, we've been trying to move more and more of our conversations to as open as possible. And there's additional steps we're taking there. But for those familiar, Cathedral to Bazaar, we're finding we started in the Cathedral because that's what we had to do to get stuff moving quickly. But that is not the long-term goal. And this meeting in particular, opening up the TSC, starting to have these conversations with the community and build on top of what we have and use that initial launch pad to move into the Bazaar has at least been my goal. And it seems like that's been a shared goal for a lot of people here.
Of course.
Okay. There's one last item to discuss. GitHub organization membership and groups. So sorry, I'm going to move on quickly because we've got 3 minutes left. With the introduction of the Open TSC governance, we now are renaming some of our teams that we were naming internally. So we, I believe before we had technical steering committee, but then we also had core developers and core engineers. I think there's 2 groups in GitHub that are getting conflated with each other. And I was going to propose that we remove as much as possible from our GitHub org membership. So we keep it down to just people who are actively involved within OpenTofu. Just for some references, maybe the TSC members, Sasha's no longer working with us, Ronnie's no longer working on OpenTofu, WST is no longer needed, Yusuf maybe is not needed. We can reduce this down, and then we use OpenTofu to define all of our GitHub repos, orgs, and memberships, and make life a lot easier just to clean things up. Roger.
Do we just keep the 2 main groups? I think we've got contributors and maintainers specified in the governance. Do we stick to that?
Yeah, I think the naming wise, we should go with technical steering committee and maintainers.
Cool.
Yep.
Another question here is, so right now it's like a just regular organization and we're paying for it. Do we plan to continue to work it like the way it works? Or we planning to move it to under like CNCF Enterprise, if they have one, and make this organization part of CNCF Enterprise? And enterprise, I mean, like there's like term in GitHub, which is like there are enterprise account and organizations account, etc. So how we wanna what we want to do here?
My personal opinion is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we could stick where we're at. But if someone else wants to pay for our GitHub, then let the CNCF
like
pay.
right now, like Scalar covering the bill, and like it's just like a couple $100 a month, so like, it's not a big deal. We can continue to cover it. It's not a problem.
Yeah, but there are situations like we had an incident recently where we ran thousands of GitHub actions by accident, and we're very thankful that they're free for public repositories, but otherwise that would have cost around $5,000, and I don't think Scalar would have been too happy footing that bill.
Yeah, like shit happens.
Yeah. Maybe it's something we should investigate once we've been fully onboarded into the CNCF and see what the Linux Foundation say.
But they're also like we can set like billing limits on GitHub, so like we'll be protected. Yeah. Like say $500 of billing limit, spending limit, and then if things like this, situation like this happen, like nobody isn't happy actually.
Yeah, I believe we've set a budget fully of $500 total. $550 total. Oh, we spent $1. Sorry, Igor. OpenTofu is surprisingly cheap to run in general. Okay, we are 1 minute over. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. I will post all the documentation in Markdown format, add everybody as a reviewer on the GitHub repo, and along with a link to this video.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you.